Well, here we are. Pastor Cathy is talking with John Siburt, who is the President COO of Citysquare in downtown Dallas. Hi, John.
Hey, Cathy.
So I've known John for a bit of time and have really leaned on him as a bit of a mentor for my work in poverty and work with those who are challenged with housing and working through a number of things. And so I have great respect for that ministry of his, and I wanted to share some of that with all of you and hear what just let you hear what I hear. So John, why don't you tell everybody about yourself and about Citysquare for those who don't know about Citysquare?
Sure. Citysquare is a faith-based nonprofit headquartered in downtown Dallas. Started about 31 years ago. Actually started as a church food pantry 31 years ago out of the Preston Road Church of Christ. This large, multifaceted poverty-fighting organization that it is today. We fight the causes and effects of poverty. We talk about doing that through service, advocacy, and friendship. So the service takes forms of about 20 different programs that we talk about being focused primarily in terms of our 4 H's: health, hunger, housing, and hope. But we do a little bit of everything in terms of the fight against poverty. Poverty hits people on all fronts and is very complex. And so we try to have kind of a complex network of comprehensive programming to fight back and help people everywhere that it's hitting them. So that's what Citysquare does. We have about 150 full-time employees. That bumps up with AmeriCorps members in the summer to about 350. But we're working 20 different programs, many focused in Dallas alone, but some all over North Texas. I kind of had a faith journey that led me to Citysquare. Before coming to Citysquare in 2012, I was a minister for 10 years in Richardson at what was at the time Richardson East Church of Christ. It's now called Care Church. But I preached there for just about almost exactly 10 years. And I left like 2 months before my 10th year anniversary. So ministry, church work had kind of been my background. I grew up a preacher's kid and went into church work anyway, and was very active in congregational life, but always found that my passion for the kingdom and my theology and my understanding of what God cares about took me to the margins and took me outside of congregational life. And so more and more, that's where my faith led me. And I found myself less and less at home in the regular rhythms of congregational ministry and feeling more compelled to take my gifts somewhere else. I'm a creative generalist. And so when I did aptitude testing, my advisor said, yeah, you're the guy in Apollo 13 when they have to take all the parts on the spaceship and create a new filter. They want you at the table because you're a creative problem solver. And I always know how to exercise that in church life without it being threatening to folks. And so I found myself repressing a lot of that creativity. But I've been able to kind of let that loose at Citysquare.
Yeah, let's talk about that in a minute, because there is one thing I want you to share with people. But I think in listening to what you said, the journey's been a bit of, for sure, integrating vocation and faith. And so in what ways at Citysquare do you find that challenging, or do you find it encouraging for you, or to encourage others to integrate faith and works?
Sure. I think my faith led me to this work. And so in some ways it's very orienting to be doing the thing that I think God cares about the most and doing something that I think God blesses and being somewhere where I think Jesus is. And so I find myself encountering Christ, experiencing God's love in powerful ways among the poor.
Could you give an example of something? Putting you on the spot, but
yeah, I think I'll give a long answer. I think one of the things that I wrestled with in congregational life is I felt like, especially from my faith tradition, is not one of the more progressive ones in our country in churches of Christ. I felt like church made ministry the last thing. Like first you have to believe what we believe doctrinally. And so there has to be agreement on certain doctoral truths. And if you have the right doctrine and then you have the right behaviors, if you adhere to our moral code, right thinking plus right behaving means you qualify for ministry. And so in order to get to do ministry, you better think right and behave right according to us.
Right.
And so I think where I am now, that gets flipped and the ministry comes first. And we can pursue peace and justice and community and a deep sense of shared humanity. And it doesn't matter how different we are. And it doesn't matter whether or not you agree to certain doctrinal beliefs. It doesn't matter if you have my moral code. If we have some deeper sense of what it means to be human and deeper calling to what I think are kind of the real heart of God type issues, then that unites us more than those other things.
Right. And that's sort of an indication of considering all of the people that interact at Citysquare as your neighbors.
Yes.
Instead of clients or participants or anything else, we're all neighbors.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a big mantra for us, is that we don't choose to live in a world of rich and poor at Citysquare. We think everybody's rich and everybody's poor, just in different ways.
Yeah.
So we believe in the wealth of the poor. And so I think being in an environment where you can surprise one another with kind of an incarnation of Christ in one another, and see God at work and alive in other people. And instead of viewing people as far as how they're flawed or how they're wrong, see God's richness and the depth of God's love in them. I have encounters like that in my work all the time. So
that is so great.
Definitely.
That's really good stuff. I like that. So how has the pandemic affected what's going on at Citysquare? I mean, have you been able to work through it, still serve, still be in ministry with everyone?
Yes, it's been an adjustment. Our team's done an amazing job. We basically had to transform our service delivery model for all of our programs in a matter of days. So pre-COVID-19, our food pantry prides itself on being client choice, which means folks get to come in and shop. We don't just tell you, here, take a bag of whatever's in here.
Right.
Grocery store type model, come in, be a part of the community, choose what you want to take with you. Now we have to do drive-through and just give you a bag of prepackaged food. So we've been able to pivot and make that model. We're serving a huge increase in people because of this crisis. And so the drive-through food pantry, moving case management for our foster youth and our neighbors that we've put into housing, moving that virtual has been a challenge, but we've been able to do that. Instead of having centers that function, sites that people come to receive services, we have to take those to folks now. So there's a lot of dropping things off, picking things up, taking them to neighbors. So we're making all that happen in some really powerful ways, and I'm really proud of our team. I think for us, I often describe poverty as the natural disaster that nobody sees. It's the tornado, hurricane that just nobody sees and comes and responds to.
Right.
And so now I've been telling folks, it was a pandemic for our neighbors long before COVID-19.
Yeah.
And so I do think the pandemic has created some awareness and some shared understanding of that now that people couldn't see or were too distracted to see beforehand. So now, basically the fatal effects of racism, structural racism, and the racializing of poverty. Now we see Black and brown people dying at a much higher rate than white people. And now it's like, why does that happen? Well, we can tell you why that happens. We experience it every day in our work. Or the bad social determinants of health that poor people have.
Right.
They don't have housing. They don't have access to groceries. They don't have health care available. Now we see what happens when the worst happens. We're in it. So in some ways, it's really shone a light on what we already knew in our work in the fight against poverty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how has your interaction, I got two more questions, your interaction with volunteers changed? Are they still able to participate and be in ministry with the neighbors, or has that been, how has that been?
Well, as you might imagine, because I experienced this in church, a lot of times your best volunteers at church are retirees and senior citizens. And
Right.
so your primary volunteer group is sidelined by this.
We've seen it too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the case for us. So we actually have a number of AARP members that volunteer for us. And we had to send all them home and say, hey, for your well-being, don't come up here. We've been able to replace them, though, with a new crop of volunteers from some surprising places. Some have been corporations and other civic organizations rallying to come in mass and serve with us. Others have been, there's a group called Get Shift Done that hires shift workers and pays them to fill volunteer slots for nonprofits. And so we have a group of those shift workers working for us at our food pantry. The National Guard has brought volunteers with us to the pantry. So we have a big National Guard presence every day at the food pantry. The community's rallied in new ways, and it's kind of been next man up, and new folks have stepped into the slot where our faithful volunteers usually would be.
And I think definitely, Pastor Blair had a sermon last week that she ended with God provides, God provides, God provides. The Spirit moves people when something shuts down. The Spirit moves people to come in. So thankfully, that's people are responding to that. So now definitely. I really have two more questions. You talked at the beginning about your inner need for creativity and to find a great way to express that. And I thought one way that you could do that is to share with everyone what your new project is from a development standpoint and how that's going to impact Citysquare and lives.
Sure. In addition to providing various services to folks, we've realized you can't win the fight of poverty just in service delivery. So advocacy is a big part of our work in trying to change policies and speak up for people. And then place-based initiatives and creating new environments and building community has been important for us. So we've done a number of different real estate projects to kind of change the built environment for folks in poverty. And so all of that's kind of converged into a project at the Forest Theater, where the old historic Forest Theater down near Fair Park, we're trying to basically renovate it and open it back up for business as a theater and performing arts center and community center. And it has a strip mall connected to it. And we are turning that into a community classroom in partnership with Dallas ISD to basically make that a learning resource for kids in that feeder pattern of South Dallas. They have very little access to the performing arts magnet to Booker T. Washington. And so it's really going to be a baby Booker T, where low-income kids can have a place to take dance, to learn how to play an instrument, to act, to produce film. And so we're working to make it a community classroom and a performing arts space. And then around that, we hope to do mixed income housing, health and wellness benefits, economic development. So really basically overinvest in a neighborhood that's been underinvested in for generations.
Yeah, I'm just so excited about that. And I know it's a long-term dream that's just getting off the ground, and a long-term vision for what it can be, but it will really revitalize and have a huge impact on children and the families in that area. So I congratulate you for actually getting it under control and being able to start it. Kudos for that. So the last question that I have as we finish up here is, so what next when the pandemic gets lifted? What are your hopes for Citysquare that we could have learned during this process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been telling people that I hope we don't go back to normal, because we need a new normal,
right,
as a society, I think. So I'm hoping that we will come out of this with a fresh sense of our need for one another and a fresh commitment to equity and to justice. We live with too much inequity and too much of a divided city between haves and have-nots. We concentrate affluence, we concentrate wealth, and we also, on the flip side, then concentrate poverty and the social problems that come from that. And so finding a way to get past there's them and there's us, and there only be us, I'm hoping that as we've seen when our country's gone through other shared trauma, whether it's the Great Depression or World War II, a generation came out of that with a strong sense of community and of what it means to be us.
Right.
I think we need a fresh dose of that. And with that, then policy change that will allow en masse for there to be better experiences and more access to opportunity and equity for folks. I think it's a fresh wind of God's Spirit for the church. The church has been lulled to sleep in thinking that church is something you dress up for when there's really a mess you go get into. And so the church doesn't need, I kind of wince when ministers now grab onto the church has never been the building. Well, most Sundays you couldn't tell that by the way we choose to practice our faith. And so I think the church being forced to realize again that the primary fuel and fire of our life together is the people, not the place. That creates huge opportunity for churches whose imaginations have just shrunk down to fit inside the walls of their current space.
Right.
Now we're unleashed to dream bigger than that. And I think God's dreams for the church are bigger than that.
I agree. I completely agree. And I'm just so thrilled that you had the time to talk to us about it. If people want to look individually to Citysquare for a volunteer, why don't you give them the website?
Citysquare.org, and you can click there. Both, there's a donate page, there's a virtual support page that kind of lists all the different ways you can help us right now, and there's a volunteer link where you could find out how to serve with us.
That's super. John, we're just so thankful that you could spend this time with us. We're so grateful for how you've just jumped in and have led God's children to be in ministry together and to be with neighbors and to become neighbors. And we just really look forward to continuing in partnership with you as much as we can at Arapahoe.
Thanks, Cathy. It's good to be with you.
We'll talk to you soon.
All righty.
Bye.